Welcome to Sparking Success with Aaron Opalewski. Aaron brings you conversations that spark innovation, cultivate leadership skills, and pave the way for your business success. In each episode, we delve into the dynamic world of business and leadership, exploring strategies, insights, and success stories that fuel your professional journey.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sparking Success. Today we have Sarah Englade on with us. Sarah, hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. For everybody, if you don't know who Sarah is, I'm going to read a little bio on her. But if you're on LinkedIn or any of the social platforms, you've probably seen her. And if you haven't, you should, because she is amazing on social. She comes with a presence and just has some great things to say. So I'll get into this, but I wanted to brag on her a little bit. If you haven't followed her yet, make sure you do. So here we go. Sarah is the owner and founder of Monarch Talent Solutions, a boutique recruiting firm specializing in senior level and mid-level executive direct hire roles in accounting, finance, and human resources throughout Houston, Texas. Sarah serves as an executive recruiter within the firm, partnering with local companies to grow their teams. She also offers candidates career resources, including resume writing, cover letter support, interview support, job market trend updates, and local continuing education opportunities and more. Before launching Monarch in 2020, Sarah gained nearly a decade of recruiting and leadership experience at two global recruiting firms. In her role, she was regularly recognized as a top producer, successfully placing over 2,800 candidates between 2012 to 2020 and generating millions in revenue. Now Sarah's focused on humanizing the recruiting process, driven by her firm's core values. Wow, 2,800 placements. That's a lot.
I know. And I know that number because they pulled a report and they made a thing about it. So
Yeah,
I never forgot that number. Yeah.
I think that's something we do too. We focus on how many opportunities we've created, and it could become a transactional thing when we're dealing with that many people, right? But it's cool to take a step back and think about, like, wow, that's actually a lot of people impacted. So
Yeah, it was a lot. I was in contract staffing too. So, I think that probably played a part in it. But yeah, it was a lot of people, a lot of opportunities.
a lot of phone conversations, that's for sure.
You know it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tons of those.
So Sarah, I know some about your story, but I guess actually before we get into that, it's cool to be on here with you because Sarah and I know each other through Arte Syndicate
Yeah.
and mutual friend. I think you're actually just with them in Arizona, but Brent Osurka.
Yep.
And I'd only known Brent for probably like 5 months when we were at an Arte Live in Nashville, and he just mentioned that he was meeting up with you. And he's like, man, he was just raving about you, about how great you were. Like, you were just like, she's a great recruiter. I'm telling you, man, you can tell. And, I think we connected on LinkedIn, like either then or shortly thereafter. We still never got the chance to meet in person, but we've kept in touch through social and a few phone calls. And I just love watching your content. You do a great job.
Thank you.
I can tell you're my kind of people when it comes to the recruiting industry. And she just knows what she's talking about. So that's a little bit on how we met. I know some of your story, in researching this and from some of those conversations, but if you could just tell us the story of Monarch and how you got into recruiting and, how we're here today.
Well, I'll try to be brief with the story because I think a lot of people know it by now. But so in total, I've got 12 years of recruiting experience. But I started my career back in like 2012, and I started with a very, very big firm in the temp staffing space. So it all sort of felt like I'm just like every other recruiter, Aaron. Like, I did not plan on being a recruiter. It fell in my lap. I had a sales background. I worked for medical spas. I was a licensed esthetician, but because I could talk and I could sell, I was always in management and leadership. So I'm talking from like 20 years old, 21, I was having to sell these really, really big packages. And so when I got into recruiting, it was because I sort of felt like my job was kind of not secure because I had joined a company that was really taking off. And they took off way too fast. And everybody was like running to the bank to cash our paychecks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got rent. I was single. I was here in Houston. My family is from Massachusetts. So I got nervous, and I only knew one person that was a recruiter. And honestly, I really didn't even know what she did. And I didn't know what she did. And so I gave her my resume, and the rest is history in that role. Like, she passed it around a couple of different times. I interviewed nonstop with this one firm. I kind of caught on that I was no longer being interviewed for them to find me a job, but they were trying to see where I fit in their organization. And they settled on a position where I was going to be doing administrative staffing for downtown Houston. So I came in, they gave me a leadership title, but I had no team. It was really just me. And I was a sponge. I didn't know what I was doing. I really still didn't understand recruiting. And I tell this to a lot of people, like, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I think it takes like 6 to 9 months for you to actually get it, where you're like, okay, I do this, this, and this because this is why. It takes a while. It seems like it makes sense. But then once you start making the calls and making the connections and making the placements, that's when it starts to like, oh, I'm doing this because of that. So you've got to be around really strong people. And I honestly was. And so I started off in temp staffing. I became really, really good at it very quickly. And I got bored. So I went to my boss and was like, because it got to a point, Aaron, where I was just like, do I need to change jobs? Because I was just feeling kind of like a little bit of the burnout because of the temp staffing and how quick it was in the space that I was at. And I just asked her, I'm like, what is next for me? And she's like, accounting. So I was like, sure, I'll give it a stab. So I went into the accounting space, still temp to hire, and also just excelled at that quickly, just took off. Kept growing with the company, was in downtown. Then I took on recruiting. So I was an inside recruiter. So a lot of people do full desking. I didn't full desk it. I probably full desked for maybe a year, but the rest of that time I was an inside recruiter. So I just talked to job seekers. So I took over downtown, the Houston Galleria area. Then I moved up. I ended up taking over like 4 territories in Houston. I managed a pretty big team. And then I got fired.
Yeah.
So it happens. I got fired as a top producer. And I tell this story, you know, I deserved to get fired, to be honest with you. I was in an environment that just was not the right fit for me. And it wasn't the right fit from the jump. It really wasn't. I knew it. I knew it was a gut feeling, but I didn't want to change jobs again. I was really, really good at it. And so I kept going back and showing up, and it became harder and harder and harder. And by the time I actually got the boot, I was unapproachable. I was difficult to work with because I was so good at my job. Unless your job was like fully, we called it rich, unless the job had like a budget, a bill rate, a start date, all the things, a job description, I wasn't working it. And everyone wanted me to work their job. Everybody's like, but I want you to work it. I'm like, but I'm not working it because I don't have all the details. Like, never mind. Yeah. I was very difficult. People didn't even want to call my phone. They would be like, oh God, I don't want to call her. And to their defense, if I saw their name, I'd be like, I was really to that point. And so I ended up getting fired. They gave me some, crazy excuse. But the truth was, I think if they had been honest, the truth was they didn't like me and I didn't like them. And it was just no longer a fit. And so when they fired me, the only thing I said in the whole sit down was, okay, that was it. That's all that I had. Like, I just said, okay, sign these papers. One was the obligation to my non-compete, and they sent me out the door. Yeah, they sent me packing.
Man, yeah, I heard that in one of the podcasts that I listened to, like prepping, but even how you said it there, I had a very similar experience in, my 18 months at, a bigger recruiting company. I loved it there, and I had some amazing experiences. But in February of 2009, they demoted me. And the day after, they laid off 81 people and consolidated 5 offices. Wow. So, including like we had an office of about 75, and it was almost all wiped out. There's like 5 of us left. And I have a different perspective on it now, because I think the person that took over just kind of went with what they knew and didn't have a lot. Like, they took over in January that year, and 1 month to evaluate a whole, like basically half of a state. How are you you can't get to know everybody.
Yeah, you can't.
And I look at some of my associations there now, and I was somewhat of a golden boy there because I worked hard and put people to work, and but some of the people I was associated with were kind of blacklisted, and whether that was fair or not, like I look at it now, and I think there was reasons for that I didn't understand as like a 23-year-old, newer to the workforce. But when I sat down with them in April, I stayed on for about 2 months. I'm glad that I kept working hard, but we had a conversation and sat down, and I looked at the guy. They pulled me in, and I'm like, "You don't like me very much, do you?" And he's like, "No, not really."
At least he was
Okay.
honest.
Yeah. So that was my last day. So I made it 2 years or 2 months through that demotion, but I was having a hard time because I was demoted, and I was ahead in commissions of the person they demoted me to work with, and there's probably some things I could have learned, but at the time I did not take that very well and was tough to work with. I would call you out if it's interesting to hear you call it rich. We called it like qualified and unqualified, but if your job wasn't qualified, I was all over your shit.
Yeah, me too.
At that point.
I'm like, we're not wasting my time here. Do you see my desk? It's a heavy desk, and this is a bunch of BS. I was difficult. Yeah.
I was just laughing hearing you say that, because I'm like, that's exactly what I was doing like right before my exit. So it's funny. But okay. So then you started Monarch after that?
Well, not right away. So it's funny because I'm walking out with my boxes. I call my husband and I'm like, I just got fired. And I was there for 6.5 years. And he's like, there is no way. Because I was a top producer. Like I got to go to, their, thing in Vegas. And I was always on the top of the scorecard. And so he was like, there's absolutely, like, you're lying. You're kidding. I'm like, I'm not kidding. But we're going to be okay. Like I just said, we're going to be okay. So I got in the car. I'm an introvert, after a long day in recruiting, honestly, like I drive home in complete silence. I don't listen to music. I don't listen to nothing. Like I have to be dead quiet. I have to recharge.
I get
that
it.
is me.
I get it. Yes.
You understand it. So
I do.
I was lost in my head. I'm driving home in dead silence. I get home. And the immediate thing I did was I texted. So there's one guy here in Houston. I have not met him, but he follows me on Instagram. I followed him, I think, on LinkedIn. Even I wasn't very active on LinkedIn back then, but he followed me on Instagram, and he owns a firm here in Houston called Encore Search Partners. His name is Jeremy Jensen. He has the GOAT in his name. So I actually DM'd him. Not knowing him, but just knowing that he was successful in the space. And I just said, hey, Jeremy, can I pick your brain? I'll take you to lunch, grab coffee. I'm not with this company anymore. And he's like, look, I'm going to save you the trouble. Like we can still go to lunch. I'm down. But if the question's going to be, should I go back into agency or start my own company? You can either come work for me and make me a bunch of money, or you can go start your own company. And I was like, gotcha. Well, I wasn't confident. I just got fired. I was in shock. I was happy though. I was completely relieved that they were able to help me out with that, because I wasn't going anywhere and I was miserable. But so I leaned into my network, had job interviews set up right away. I had to keep interviewing. I was doing the tour. So for 2 weeks, I just kept touring and doing my interviews. But the problem was that non-compete. So I, even though they fired me, I was obligated to it for 12 months. So I had 6 job offers lined up in 2 weeks. It was incredible. And I had to keep saying, like, I was fired. I was fired. I was fired. I was fired. I just kept talking about it. Didn't matter to anybody, because a lot of people knew the company or understood it, gave me some grace. The more I talked about it, I didn't even get to feel embarrassed about it. I never felt shame or embarrassment over it at all. Because you just keep talking about it, it's just a thing, you get through it. And so I ended up settling with a company that was based out of Nashville, and they created a role for me because of my non-compete. So they created a role that didn't make any sense, Aaron. I didn't even know what I was getting myself into, but I was really needing this position so I could A, stay in recruiting and do what I loved, but B, the culture for this company was the complete opposite of what I was coming out of. And I was going for feels and vibes. I was going for energy. And the CEO of that company sold me. So I was excited to join that company. And so I ended up actually there. They made my home office. My home office was Memphis, Tennessee. And I had to go to Memphis 3 weeks out of every month for the first 6 months. Then they sent me to Dallas, and then the pandemic happened. So by the time my non-compete was over, it was April of 2020. Yeah, that's how the chips fell for me. Yeah.
Depends how you. Great timing, awful timing, on how you look at it, I guess. Right?
I know, but I was finally home, and I made it through, I think, 2 rounds of layoffs maybe. And the writing was on the wall. They were like, on a Monday at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they were like, Sarah, can you jump on a Teams tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? And I'm like, sure. So I knew I was being laid off. I got laid off. And right away, I did it what any recruiter does again, leaned into my network, had an interview that day with another global firm, multi-billion-dollar firm, and set up to meet with them. And honestly, it was a really, really good interview. Really good. Like mutually really liked each other. They could see me doing X, Y, and Z. But the problem with it was I couldn't see myself doing it for them because it was agency again. All of a sudden it clicked. Like, even though the interview went well, but it was like the same thing I had done for 2 firms. Did I want to go back into that again? I was so successful. I knew I could do it. So it was like the first company taught me the foundation. They taught me metrics and KPIs and the importance of that. The second company taught me that I was entrepreneurial because there were no rules, no metrics, nothing. It was very bizarre, but they taught me like, if you're going to be thrown into this, like you are either going to sink or swim. And I was swimming. So by the time that was done, I just knew, I'm like, all right, let's do this. I think I'm going to start my own company. So I just talked to my husband again, and I was like, do you believe in me? And that was really what I asked him, just, plain and simple. And he said, yes. And so I just, went to the fam, talked to my parents, went to his parents, went to my grandma, and they all invested in me. And I Googled how to start a company. And then I started Monarch.
That's awesome. Take action. That's how you started.
I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured it out.
Yeah, there's a lesson in that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, so you started Monarch then at that point. What I find so interesting about, I guess Monarch, there's a lot to be interested in with your content and everything because you post so much good stuff. But where we are doing stuff, like we are just now niching in, like we have portfolio companies now, and our company that's been around the longest, Spark Talent, it works in 14 sectors all over the country. There is no niche. We do now own kind of like entry level, skilled labor, engineering, and like mid-level placements across the board. We drop kind of like the C-level stuff, the IT stuff. Like we've with the ads, we've kind of niched that out and condensed what we do at Talent. But listening to you talk about part of your strategy on like, hey, we are accounting, finance, human resources, and we are in the Houston market. And what I put down is because you have pipelines in your network, and I see that you're huge on relationships. So it seems like it's baked into your DNA of how you want to build the company. Talk about that, if you will. I'm just interested to hear more about that. I can see why it works for you.
So when I first started, I got so much advice from people saying like, how much money you're leaving on the table, just niching down or just staying in your market in Houston. I don't think people realize how big Houston, Texas is. We are the 4th largest city in the United States of America. Like it takes you an hour and a half from one corner of Houston to get to the other corner. It's huge. And, our main industry here is oil and gas, but we've got it all. We've got everything. Now we've got tech coming in here. We've got, investment banking, manufacturing, like you name it. Construction's huge here. But I learned early on from someone like there's riches in niches. Pick a niche and stick with it. And so I knew that I could do accounting and finance. Now I had only done temp staffing. So when I went into Monarch, I didn't want to do that anymore. So I did actually sign up. I have a back office. They can, help me if I need to do contract staffing if I need them, which I probably at this point don't. But when I first started the company, I did. So I'm like, well, maybe if I get contracts, it was during the pandemic, we launched in October of 2020. So we were still in it. I ended up going with the back office there, but it was really an easy decision. It's like I'm going direct hire and I'm going with what I know. And I know accounting and I know finance, but now I have to learn the senior level positions because I actually didn't know those. So before I started my company, I had not filled a controller position. I never filled a VP role or a director of accounting or a C-level position ever. I was in the transactional accounting space with my previous companies. So I was filling maybe like senior accountant roles and accounting supervisor positions. So I really had to position myself and I had to sell it. And how you sell it is you start heavy on the recruiting side. So I wasn't really focused on business development in the very beginning. What I was focused on was there was a lot of people out of work and they all needed help and they needed someone to talk to. And so the people that I was connecting with were going to be hopefully my future buyers. So I was connecting with controllers, I was connecting with CFOs and CAOs, and I was going heavy recruiting in the very beginning when I started Monarch. And I did that. It was very strategic. I wanted to help those folks out. I also wanted to get leads from them. And I knew if they were placed somewhere, I wasn't going to be able to place them. I had no business. But I figured, okay, they're going to remember how I treated them during this time. And I hope that they remember me when they have to hire for their teams. And that's exactly what happened. So a lot of the people that became my first clients earlier on were my candidates during the pandemic that couldn't find work. So that's how that worked there. I'm still just all about Houston, Texas. I've done this now for 12 years in Houston. It's my backyard. It's where I play. I know these people. I build my pipeline. I'm heavy on referral business. And so I think, going outside of my niche or my market, I don't think it would help me. I think it would hurt me. So I'm just very committed to it.
Yeah, I definitely think, when you know an area or, whether that be a sector or like a geographical region or even if it's like a 20, 30 mile radius, like your unique advantage is that you know everything about the area.
Yep.
And this, like, we're dealing with people in like life altering decisions, right? So, even as, you look at like, hey, we want to humanize the process. Well, it's like that speaks to that. I think it sets you up to do that well. And that, like, man, we can really give a white glove experience around this huge life change that someone's going to be looking at, right down to like, hey, if you move here from another part of the state or the country, like, okay, where's the best places to live? What restaurants do you want? Like, you can get into all that. And as
Literally.
you and I know, like in some of these conversations with candidates, like it literally comes down to like, you want to make them feel comfortable, like with this big change. And so it could be down to what door they're going to go into, who they're going to say hi to when they walk into the interview. Hey, park over in this, section. It's
so
like
funny, yeah.
all these little things, that like, I know for a fact that's helped us make some placements over the years. And it's probably one of the things that we battle the most too, in that we, in some of the, like within our biggest company, we aren't niche, right? It's like, man, that's a superpower when you have that. Like, we try and do that in pockets with people owning an area, right? And that's why we do that. But I totally get where that's like it is a huge advantage for you to be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny that you say that because that is so true. Like, I know these clients, I know every inch of the city at this point. So when I got into recruiting, I actually really didn't know Houston that well. I had been here for a few years, but like I stayed in a certain part of town, like where the goodies were. That's what I call, I was a kid. So it's like I wanted to know where like the fun things were, but I actually had to learn the city based on zip code. So I actually know Houston, Texas by every zip code, like every inch. It's crazy. I'll talk to candidates like, what part of town do you live in? No, give me the zip code. And I'm like, oh, 77002. I'm like, oh, I know exactly where you are. So, and it's the same thing with, my clients. My clients are, I act as a true extension to them. That's really, really important to me. So we have core values here and they mean everything to us. And actually, my very first client that ever gave me a shot, when we had our first call, was the call that actually changed everything for me. And I've never had a call like it since. And this call was so different because of how they vetted me. They weren't asking me about my fee structure or how soon I was going to get them resumes. They asked me what my core values were. Then they asked me why I went into business for myself. And then they wrapped it up with saying, we're also very core values driven. I want you to go to our website and read about, I had already done that. So I had already done my research. I knew that they were, but they were serious about their values. So they were very, very serious. They felt that I aligned with them. And because they were also kind of an established startup, they called themselves an established startup at 300 million in revenue. But because they were also an established startup and I was a startup, the entrepreneurial spirit also aligned. So they now have become, they're still like my best client to this day. But it's funny because I have a lot of those now where, to your point, like park over here, you're going to see this person at the front desk, ask them for this, or if you need that. And that's, I think, the benefit of working with a recruiter like myself and other boutique recruiters is that they actually do know a lot of the little things, and the little things are what matter to people. And so, I think it's huge. It becomes less transactional the more you know about your clients and the more you know about your candidates.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when I was looking at, I think it was your website, but, or maybe it was an article, but you talked about like learning from mistakes. And that's a big thing for me. Like we have core values around, conquering adversity is the recipe to success. Mindset's the foundation of excellence. And so when I see that on people's websites or articles, I just love to hear some about that, because I know it's been important for us to evolve and learn. We learn, from our mistakes. We can adapt and create great things from them. So we'd love to hear just what that means to you.
So one of our core values is to never make a major decision in a valley, because I feel like when I'm in a valley, that's my mistake, right? I'm sitting there and I'm like, what did I do? Or like whatever that is. Okay, being new in business, I've made a lot of mistakes, honestly. Like you have to make them. If you go into this thinking that you're going to be perfect and you're not going to make the same mistake as someone else, like you are just lying to yourself. We all do it. And some of the mistakes I made early on, I hired too quickly for my team. That was one thing that, I made a big mistake on. And I kept a person on my team for 2 years too long that was never a fit. And I kept the person selfishly because I had trained her and she became very good. She was my top biller. But she was very difficult. Like I talked about me being difficult. I can speak on this because she was difficult. And it was affecting everyone on the team, Aaron, to be honest with you. And I made excuses for this person because she was my top biller. And what ended up happening is this person's attitude just ruined the team. And it became a cancer. Learned from that. You have to sometimes let your best players go. And I had multiple conversations with her and mentoring her. But, when I started Monarch, I really wanted it to be, again, selfishly, a safe place for Sarah. Like I didn't want to do the corporate script anymore. I did not want it to be cutthroat and just, I didn't want an environment where you could feel the tension and you could cut it with a knife, because I came from that. And it's exhausting and it messed with my mental health. And when I started this, I wanted this to be not that. And so, boy, I learned from that experience there. And that was not easy for me to let her go. And she did not take it well either. So totally learned a ton from that. I think taking on too much, taking on too much when you're trying to do everything and you're trying to be the best at everything, like you're just not the best at everything. You can't be. So for me, I think what I've learned is that staying super disciplined and never forgetting what my mission is. My mission is to put humanity back into hiring, for work, but my mission really is to just really make a difference. I'm trying to reinvent the industry, by doing it the right way. I can't take on all this other stuff and be everywhere and not be able to focus on what's really moving the needle towards what I'm trying to achieve here. So again, like I think when people get into business, whatever business it is, but sticking in recruiting, thinking that it's going to be easy and that it's going to be flawless, you're going to make all this money. It's hard. It's really, really hard. And not everybody is built for this. And, you've got to really honestly be in it, and you've got to be in it for the right reasons. And the right reason is because you're trying to make a difference, not just because you're just trying to get rich quick, because this ain't it. That's what you're trying to choose to do.
Yeah, I try and, one, I've the same mistakes that you reference. I've made the same ones as well, and had a similar situation early on in Spark where we had to let go one of our top performers because it got to a point where it was really affecting the team. And I think, fast forward almost a decade from that, and I think that was best for that person. I know it was best, for talent. It's unfortunate because it's like, man, you'd like to make that work. And I felt like I could make it work for a period of time. But then as we expanded to a certain point, I saw it wasn't just me that had to navigate that. It was affecting the overall team, and it was really holding us back. But not the easiest thing to do, to let someone go that is billing a lot for you, or is a good producer, has good qualities. Just some things that aren't, meshing with the culture. And then the other thing you mentioned, when we started Spark, part of the reason we started it is because of, I won't get into every detail, but like you mentioned, that like tension and being able to cut it like with a knife, and just like, it's like, man, like we want a high performance team. We want a high performance culture. We've definitely had to work at this and evolve it, and I think become more like just mature and practice what we preach. But where I'd come from prior, like I feel like that was the instance. We had grown the team, and it was super high pressure, very cutthroat, I guess I would say at times. And hey, I'm not saying that there wasn't good things about learning on how to do this at an elite level within that, but just like you could sometimes just cut that tension with a knife. And I'm like, man, like I don't, especially now, like having two daughters, and like, my wife works with us at the company. I friends that, have worked here, and friends that have worked out and that haven't, right? But that got to a point where it's like, man, like I don't really feel comfortable about like referring people to, like, it's my own company, like back before Spark. It's like I just don't feel like this is like what we're trying to put together isn't coming out, and like I can only control so much of that. So I need to kind of step out and do this a different way. And not that when we started Spark I was perfect on that, or we were, but we have evolved it over a period of time. It's like, okay, like this is a tough industry. It's not for everyone. There's a ton of rejection. You do have to be competitive. You have to be service driven and focus on the people, be able to get it done ultimately for the client. But it's like, hey, like if my daughters wanted to work here someday, which I'm not going to pressure them to, but selfishly, I hope they do.
Hope so, yeah.
But it's a place where it's like, yeah, like I would be good with that. And it's like, hey, like that's one of my compasses for like, hey, how are we doing on our values? How are we treating people? Like, is this a place where we push each other, but we do it in a respectful way?
Right.
Like this stuff is super important. So
Yeah.
just hearing that's in, like, you can feel when you're in this industry, probably other ones too, but like you can feel the difference between the two.
Oh no, you can. I remember there was a point at my old company. I had in 2018 is when I kind of first got into self-development. Like I never really got into that before. And I got a coach because I was having a hard time going to work, like at the first firm. Like it was towards the end of my time there. I was miserable, but I was making lots of money, what I thought was lots of money, all the different things. And, I got this coach that was, totally impactful. Like I never, I have coaches now still to this day, but he really changed a lot of my mindset and perspective and everything. But what he couldn't change for me was every time I would get to the door where I'd have to badge in to get into the office, I'd have to pray. I'd be like, God, please lead me through my day today, like, and make it a good day. And I had to, because I didn't want to walk through that door. Like it was just tension. Like it would hit you, but we all felt it. It wasn't just isolated to Sarah. It was the culture of the business. It is cutthroat. It is fast paced. And yeah, to your point, there's a lot of learning that you can, there's a lot of good things that can come out of that. And you have to be very competitive. And I have two sisters, I grew up competing, against them most of the time, but like, it's okay to come from that, but it's not healthy. Like it's just not healthy. It wasn't for me. I'm not built for that. And I was in it for 6.5 years. So it's funny because when I went to the other company, it was just, it actually went through PTSD. I'm not going to lie. Like, that company was so core values driven. I was not used to that. They talked about their core values. They almost, like, I felt like they were like going a little overboard with it. And I was like, did I join a cult? Like, I was really certain that there was something up with this until I guess I got over the PTSD and like the trauma that I had just left after 6.5 years. And I started to really accept it. I'm like, God, this is such a great place. It is so different. They were proud, like that some of their, one of their actual core values that I still think about to this day was assume positive intent. So they would talk about this. And sometimes if somebody would be like, well, so-and-so did this, they're like, are you assuming positive intent? They'd be like, well, no. It was so weird. It was like we were back in school, but I was like, assume positive intent. And that actually changed my entire mindset about the industry because they were so certain that this was important to them. And so, yeah, when I started my company, it was a no-brainer. I think being part of Arate too, not ever having started a company before in my life, but, relying and leaning into Andy and Ed, and they're so driven in their values, it was a no-brainer. So yeah, we established the core values and, this place that I imagined to not be what I came from. So yeah, so super important.
Awesome. So one of the other things that I notated that's big for you is self-discipline. And I know you just completed 75 hard, I believe, which I've done a couple rounds as well, but I guess what'd you learn from that, number one, and then just in general with self-discipline. I know what's important about it to me within recruiting, but I'd just love to hear from you on your takeaways or why that's important to you.
So I consider myself a solopreneur. I'm doing this on my own. And if I am not disciplined, then I'm not going to do as well as I want to in all areas of my life. So the first time I actually did 75 hard, I think it was right around when I first started my company. And I was sort of all over the place. Honestly, Aaron, I'm like waking up so early in the morning and I wasn't like doing the working out or doing the whatever everybody else does for a morning routine. My morning routine is not probably like yours. I was talking to Brent about his and I'm like, yeah, we're very different on that. But I was getting up and getting coffee and going right to work. I was so just in work, doing the content, making the connects, doing this, doing that. I was missing joy, but I was missing like the actual structure of like, okay, you need to be doing this and then you need to be doing this. I was just getting sucked into everything and I wasn't really getting good at anything. So I don't know what triggered me to start 75 hard other than I needed something and I had never done anything for 75 days before. So I did it for the first time, I think back in 2021. And during that entire experience, as tired as I was in the beginning, I was so disciplined and I knew instantly I was seeing results, like mentally, the results that I was getting just from like my mental health was just increasing everything at work, like my productivity. Like I was so productive. And even on 75 hard, as busy as we are in that program, I never made more money. Like every time I'm on 75 hard, I swear I just do better in all areas of my life. My relationships are better. My business is better. So I think that's why I keep going back to that program because it works. And it's, people don't understand it the way that it's supposed to be understood. They think it's a diet. It is not. It's a mental discipline program. You're supposed to do these things and not cheat yourself. And if you cheat, you start over. It's just about holding yourself accountable. And I needed that. So I've actually done the program now 5 times. I failed once. And that was because I hurt my back. So that was really not my fault. But I was at the gym when it happened. So I was doing my workout. I sat on a piece of equipment, Aaron. I wasn't even touching it yet. I just sat down and I breathed and my back went pink. And I was like,
no.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, so it wasn't my fault. It was my body failed me, but it didn't stop me. I got back on it. And, so that's how, and I love it. I'll probably do 75 hard in the Live Hard program. To be honest with you, I love it. Nothing's worked for me like that in all areas of my life. Like you can be on a diet and fitness thing and it helps with but this is just, it helps me with everything. When it comes to work, I am very disciplined. I believe in metrics. I believe in KPIs. I know that's the thing on LinkedIn, like, oh, I don't want to make a cold call or like, I'm sorry, it works. Like
Yeah, it
it,
needs to be part of your arsenal. Otherwise, I can almost guarantee you, I see less of that now because those people are probably getting smoked right now this year. So that's my
yep.
opinion, at least.
I
But
I believe in it. It works. You're
yeah,
supposed to have when maybe the metrics where I came from might have been too high because they were really, really intense. But I have metrics and I hit them and I circled it. I win or lose the week. You have to compound your activity and your efforts and you have to keep doing it. Before, Ed Milet came out with his book, like I'm staring at this sign. When I first started my company back in 2020, I wrote on Word, one more call, taped it up, and I stare at it every single day. One more call, one more connect, one more voice message, one more whatever. I am a huge believer in this. And then I also believe in just continuing to keep giving, 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 and not expect anything in return. And I think that's been a big game changer for me. And that's been helpful to really continue us humanizing things, to put humanity back into hiring, because we're constantly trying to give back, whether we're trying to give back to our candidates or our hiring managers, just free market intel or strategies and saying, hey, try this way. You know how many times I get clients because they're like, oh, we can't use recruiters right now. I said, okay, well, how's it going? It's going a little bit tough. I'm like, okay, how about if you changed this, this, and this, maybe kind of tweaked that, see how that works for you. Cause I think that actually could probably get more people to apply to your role. And if it doesn't work, maybe then we can chat in like 30 days. What do you think? And I send them like a PDF of like step 1, step 2, step 3, step
yep,
4. And they're like, oh, that's helpful. So
it's
I
great.
don't know. I think that you have to stay disciplined. I do my MPCs. I'm old school. I stick with it. I'm trying to add video right now, but I feel a little weird about it because I did actual videos back in 2020, 2021, didn't see the ROI on it. But now I think the time has changed. Maybe people are ready for it. So I think I might incorporate it back. So I'm not afraid of changing or trying new things. But I do stick to old school metrics for sure.
I do as well. I'd like to. I don't know that we're up on. Every day there's a new technology, right?
I
But we're
know.
we're dabbling with different stuff, and um, you know, I like to think we have a nice mix between here's some core principle, fundamental stuff. Call it old school, call it whatever you want to call it. Like we're
Hmm.
gonna do this, and then we will integrate in some new technology if we or dabble with stuff. But it's more along the lines of getting us to this old school. If it can get stuff top of funnel into these
Yeah.
conversations, that's what we're focused on. So,
Yeah.
kind of leads me to how I would answer this last question. But um, where do you see, like, what do you think is important within the recruiting industry as we move forward? There is all the tech, and the industry's changing quite a bit.
Yeah, I know.
We've both been in the industry long enough to see, some different things. Sounds like you got in after, like I got in 2008 or 2007 at the end. So like right as it was kind of like bubbling up to
Yeah.
2009, and I heard like, oh, it used to be better. It used to be better. Well, I think it was a gift, not like I didn't know anything different. I'm like, well, seems pretty good. You're saying it used to be better, but just going to focus on making placements.
Yep.
And then, 2009 happened, and that ultimately ended up being like a huge gift for me. But I've seen a couple different cycles. You've seen some
Hmm.
different things too. It's definitely like everything, in my opinion, is moving at like a very fast pace. What do you think's important, in the next, let's call it 18 months? Let's not even say 5 years, just who knows?
So I think that honestly, if you're going to be in recruiting, you have to have a personal brand and you have to continuously be okay with learning. Like I've got coaches. I just signed up with a recruiter coach. I start on July 1 with him. You have to constantly try to make sure that you are, I guess, up with the new technologies, understanding, what different ways of doing things. I don't think that you can be like, for instance, I know a lot of recruiters that have been doing this for a really, really long time. They have zero presence on LinkedIn. They don't have a brand. They don't post. They're not credible. What do we do? The first thing that we do, if like I'm looking up, we'll just say a doctor. I'm like, oh, so and so said that they go to so and so's doctor. What am I doing? I'm Googling the doctor's name, trying to find and pull up anything on them to see how relevant they are. That's what you do now. So I think that if you're, we're going through a really weird time, especially with AI. Everyone thinks AI is going to take our job. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that the people that learn AI and are really good at it are going to be just fine. This is a relationship based business. So as long as you're able to continually connect with people and make people comfortable and trust you, you're going to be okay. So I think it's building a brand, putting you in rooms where you're constantly learning and constantly leveling up and staying consistent. Like I really can't see another way of doing things. There's somebody, I'm not going to mention his name, but he's constantly posting on LinkedIn about get ready for AI, get on this AI, this. Like I've tried a couple of them too. And to be honest with you, they're just okay. They don't do anything better than what I do myself with my pipeline. So for me, I'm not worried about them. I'm not scared about them. I think that, recruiters that are not as good at the relationship building are going to lean on these, are not going to learn them, and they're going to fail. So for me, I think it's still the personal brand, push the brand, be relevant, offer help, don't be transactional in this time. And this is going to be a really good time, honestly, Aaron, because 2024 is a tough year. Anybody coming into recruiting in 2024, I think it's great because it's tough. It's a challenge. And to your point, I think if you can get in during a challenging time, that's really going to build you. I came into recruiting in 2012. I think it was 2013 or 2014 when we hit an oil and gas recession. So I'm killing it. I'm like balling out over here in Houston. And then one day it's like, I'm from Massachusetts. I don't know anything about the oil and gas industry. And it was one client like, hey, Sarah, we're going to have to end, 10 of your contractors. I'm like, in one day? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, why? Well, the price of oil. What does that mean? And then the next company is like, I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap up your 2 people, this people. I mean, I'm not kidding. In a week or two's time, I went from having like 100 probably people out on billing to like 40. My hours just went. So it's like, but I made it through. I cried, but I figured it out. And like, you end up, and I think that's the best. I think right now it's tough. If you can make it through tough times, you're going to be good. You're going to be really, really good. You're probably going to be really great at this.
I completely agree. It really kind of forges you to become great. And, you also, I use the analogy, like to catch the wave, you got to be in the water.
Yep.
So like in my experience where I see, like, let's use 2009 as an example. We were that was a tough year. We started our first industrial staffing business in 2009. And it was a tough time to start. But by midway through 2010, like we were starting to get some traction and people were starting to call people back on contract for sure. And man, it wasn't probably till like early 2012, late 2011 that I heard people start to talk on the news about like some stuff kind of coming back. But it's like, man, that had already been happening for a year and a half. Like the wave had kind of already happened before the news even caught on. So if you like just heard that in the news, and you're like, oh yeah, I'll get back in recruiting and staffing, like you missed the wave. Like the companies that were already kind of expanding had selected their vendors, or the people that kept in touch with them in the hard times are the ones that they went back to. There's a clue, for anyone that's like got a client that's not using right now, but like think about the lifetime value of the relationship. Like you want to figure out, yes, you got to generate business elsewhere, but you don't want to forget or stop talking to those clients. And when they come back, they remember, how you made them feel.
100%.
And if you're in the water, you can catch the wave. So
yeah, 100%. I also think too, I mentioned this to someone else, one of my best years in recruiting when I was an agency was during, you might have caught this on the news, but Hurricane Harvey. We were just getting like hit with a lot of hurricanes during this year.
Mm-hmm.
We had like the Memorial Day flood, the Tax Day flood, Hurricane Harvey came in, and the entire city of Houston, we were all underwater. Every one of us was either we were either stuck because the streets were flooded or like homes were actually flooded. It did, there was no mercy. Every like inch of the city was affected by it. That was a weird time, but that was my best year. I made the most money in that year, which is while businesses were trying to figure it out. They were trying to, you can get very creative in this too. And I think a lot of the time people give up when they think it's really tough. They're like, well, it's really tough. No one's hiring. No one's this, no one's that. Just keep your foot on the gas and keep trying to solve people's problems. And, for us, that's exactly what we did. And, I think I went to, Vegas, that year, and we wore these hurricane t-shirts, and people were like, holy crap, you came out of the hurricane. We're like, yeah, we came out really, really good. And it was a really crappy time, but it was because we were able to help solve so many problems for companies that never experienced that kind of,
Sure.
trauma, I guess. And so, yeah, I think it's also that too. It's like, you got to lean into it. These things, they're put in front of us for a reason. A challenge is a good thing. It's an obstacle, getting through it. That's what it's about. And you become smarter and wiser. You get to, like, I don't know. I'm never afraid of downtimes. This year's been a little slow for me, and I've totally leaned into it. And to be quite honest with you, because I've leaned into it so much, so many doors are opening for me. So I'm in my era of saying yes to everything. So it's like, I just think it's your mindset and, what you do with that.
Well, that's well said. I know that what I heard you say, in a different way, but something we're focused on with our recruiters right now is like, hey, the transactional parts of recruiting, which it's easy to kind of fall into, like, a lot of it being transactional.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if anything gets replaced over a period of time, I think it's the art, the nuance of the building the relationship, and actually, like, doing this job at an elite level, and the conversations that happen to do that. I don't see that being at risk. In fact, when I see someone go heavy on the tech side and they're not going to try and touch on those nuanced points, I'm like, game on. Like, we're just going to grab more market share if we do a good job of this. So let's focus. Let's not avoid the tools or ignore them. Let's use them, but try and use them more top of funnel to get to these artful, conversations and go deep with clients. So it's a constant thing that we're working on around here, right? Like, got to repeat, so.
Same. I'm doing it too. I'm trying to figure it all out myself, but I'm not scared of it. And I think that's the biggest thing. As long as you're willing to go in there and dive in, give new things a shot, but know that you got to be better at it than your competition. I mean, you're going to be fine.
Well, cool. Anything else you want to share today, or covered a lot? Thank you.
No, this has been great. No, and I love being on this. I think that there's a lot of, when it comes to recruiting and a lot of new people coming into the industry, I think they need to learn from people like us, to be honest with you, that, this is not, this industry is not for everybody, but it can be if you've got the right intentions. And if you really are trying to make a difference and leave lasting impressions and build true relationships, you can have this as your career for the rest of your career. This is a game-changing career. I could never imagine personally doing anything else. I love this. And when you love it, you become obsessed with it. So never forget, people, you said this earlier, people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think if you can master that, you're going to be just fine.
Thanks for coming on, Sarah. It was great to have you on. Everybody, if you don't already, follow her on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Monarch Talent Solutions, Sarah Englade. And we were joking about this the other day, but she also just recently went viral on TikTok, even though she doesn't have a TikTok, which we both thought was pretty cool. So, but seriously, I'm learning a lot from you on that front, and you just have a tremendous camera presence. Like, you're a natural at this stuff. And
Thanks.
Maybe it's not natural. Maybe it's a lot of hard work. It's probably a little bit of both, but you're doing a great job.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Well, thanks for coming on. Have a great day, everyone. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.